there's a guy named Hudson Taylor. And Hudson Taylor was a believer in Jesus. And in his life, he really believed that God was calling him to China. China is a place that does not embrace Christianity. And he felt called by God to go and tell the people in China about Jesus. And so when he moved there, he joined some other missionaries who were already there. And they go out and they do their thing, whatever technique they were using. Maybe they were handing out tracts, those pamphlets that try and sum up the gospel in 3 sentences or less. Or they went out and they maybe went door to door and they would shake people's hands and they were trying to be nice. They were trying to give people the truth of God. And yet it wasn't working. There was a resistance to these people who were going up to the people in China wanting to tell them the truth. It's like, well, why don't they want to hear the truth? Why don't they want to know about Jesus? And one of the things that God put on Hudson's heart was, how are you presenting yourself? What is it that they see when you show up at their door? What is it that they see? Well, he was from America. So do you think that what kind of what style of dress do you think he had?
Completely different.
Completely different. Thank you, Jack. He's showing up to these traditional Chinese families like this. Hi, my name's Hudson. Would you like to know about Jesus? Which is how we tend to sound to the rest of the world, I'm told. And they would say, no, thank you very much. Jack, how would you say no, thank you very much in Chinese or in Mandarin? If you didn't want to hear what I was going to say, what would you say to me?
I say, 不用了，谢谢.
They heard that over and over and over again. And he's saying, no thanks. So God puts on Hudson's heart, like, hey, something's got to change. I can't just keep doing what I'm doing because I'm comfortable with it. I need to do whatever I need to do so that these people can hear the gospel of Jesus. I don't want my jeans and t-shirt to be the reason that when I show up at somebody's house, they go, no. You look strange. You sound strange. You act strange. I'm done. So he makes a bold move. One day, he shows up in the morning at the missionary house where all the other missionaries are going to meet before they go out. And he shows up in formal Chinese attire. He's got the hat. He's got the robe. And they're like, whoa, Hudson, what are you doing, man? He's like, we got to reach these people. We look funny to them. We've got to somehow embrace their culture. Everybody else rejected it. All the other missionaries were like, no. We're not going to try and become Chinese so that they can understand. No. We're from America. We're going to do this the American way. Hudson said, you do what you want. But I believe that if the American way is getting in the way of people hearing about Jesus, I want no part of the American way. So he, in his traditional Chinese attire, went out door to door. And at first, people looked at him and went, because now he was an American dressed like a Chinese person. So that was probably even more distracting, right? That would be like, oh, hello? What? And then whatever Jack said. So then, over time, he decided, I am going to embrace the Chinese culture with my whole life. He wore these clothes all the time. He studied harder than anybody had ever studied before to learn Chinese. He grew out his hair in the back so that he had the ponytail that traditional Chinese men in that culture at that time had. And so, eventually, It was clear to all around Hudson that this man fully respected and fully embraced the culture around him. Not so that he could play dress up, not so that he could get his friends around him to laugh or think he's being weird or whatever, but because the message of Jesus was so important that he said, if they aren't going to respect this, why do I keep insisting that they do? Why do I keep trying to do the same thing when they can't hear it, when who I am and what I'm doing is distracting? And so without taking on anything that would be against God, without having to embrace the certain things about religious beliefs in China, he didn't go to the temple and worship other gods. He didn't do things that God wouldn't call him to do. But when it came to finding an open door to be able to tell someone about Jesus, he had more success than any other missionary had ever had before. But it wasn't comfortable. It wasn't easy. It meant that he had to adapt his life so that people could hear the message. We're in this series called The Church and the World, where we're looking at this letter that Paul, the Apostle Paul, wrote to the church in Corinth because they were having a real problem. They were looking at the culture around them, and they were trying to figure out, how do we live as believers in Christ in a culture that does not believe in Christ? Would you say that describes our culture? Are you with me? All right. So they are trying to figure out, how do we live in a way that doesn't offend other believers, but that doesn't alienate the people that we are trying to reach for Jesus? And so we're going to look at, there's a Bible on your table, or if you brought your Bibles, you can open it to 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Now, before we dive into this, I want you to discuss something around your table. How do you change? How do you alter your behavior in these different places? What do you do that you would normally do, but you change it when you go to the library? What do you normally do that you change when you go to your grandparents' house? Because we all do this, right? We all adapt to our surroundings. So what are some ways that you change in each of these places? So right now, around your table, everybody just take a minute or two and talk about this, and I think you'll find a lot in common. So go ahead. So talk to me. What is that? Now, I realize I may need to bring some clarification. A library is a place with books. Printed books. They're all in alphabetical order. The Dewey Decimal System. I know. It's a foreign place to you. But I'm sure you've heard about it in history class, about what a library is. All right. So, talk to me. What is an altered behavior that you take on when you go to a library? The what? Jillian. You don't dance at the library. No dancing at the library. Okay. What else?
Instead of laughing, you at least shut up.
Yeah, you shut up at the library. Like, no talking. That was always so hard for me because I'd be at the library, somebody would be like, "Hey, Jeff." I'm like, "Yeah?" Everybody around me, shh. Any other things about the library? Okay, school. What is an altered behavior at school? You're quiet, you listen, okay? You sit and you listen, probably more than you do in other places.
Dress code?
Dress code, yeah, absolutely. Well, not for everybody, but a lot of schools have a dress code. So, yeah, I don't typically wear my khaki shorts and blue button-up shirt, but at school you need to.
Try to pay attention.
You try to pay attention. You do your best to pay attention, where maybe other places you don't have to pay attention. You just sit and watch Netflix.
At school, it's half and half. There's a time when you have to shut up, and there's a time where you can blab and have fun with your friends.
Right. So knowing when to talk and when not to. All right. Grandparents' house. I want to hear, what are some of the altered behaviors when you go to grandparents?
You have to like talk really loud.
It's sort of the opposite of the library. You know, you have to raise your voice at grandparents. What else?
I'll offer to clean up, whereas at my own house I wouldn't offer to clean up as much.
Whoa! Offer to clean up help clean up the house, and yeah. Oh. So now all of a sudden you've got to treat people nicer at grandparents' house. How about this? Does anybody, when you go to grandparents' house, you just kind of agree with whatever they say? They're telling, like, I think that it's best to ride a horse on Thursday. Me too, Grandma. Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Church. What's an altered behavior at church? Like, oh, I don't want to say. Yeah. More open to what people have to say, their opinions. Okay? Yeah.
Be lazy.
Okay.
They have an opinion on who should be president.
What?
We're on church.
No, we're on church.
Oh.
What's an altered behavior at church? Matthew, what? You go into Jesus mode. Describe Jesus mode for me.
Like, perfectly sync with like church, and you're perfect, and you don't say anything, and then kind of just like follow the words. Every answer.
Okay. I'll help. Yeah.
You gotta be quiet and dance to the music.
Be quiet and dance the music. It's sort of the combination of a library and no. It's so yeah.
You have to watch what you say.
Watch what you say. All right. Finally, an honest answer. You and Matthew, are the, you clean up the way you talk. You don't get mad at people. You sit there and nod your head and agree with me. Wait, does that mean I'm a grandparent? You just hold on. Okay. So we do this. Yeah, we do this all the time. In just about every situation, we adapt to what we think is going to make us most successful, which means we've got to ask ourselves, what is our purpose and our goal if we call ourselves a Christian? If you're here this morning and you would say, I have accepted Jesus Christ into my life, I believe he is the Son of God, I believe that he died on a cross and he rose from the dead, my sins are forgiven, and I'm going to get to live in eternity with him. If you are a Christian, then you need to know, or you need to decide, well, is that just a church thing? Is that just something that you put on when you come here? And then when you go out there, you go, oh, but out there, I've got to do what everybody else is doing. And Paul talks about that in just a second. If you're here this morning and you're like, I'm not a Christian. I'm here because somebody dragged me here. I'm here because somebody invited me. I'm here because there's a cute boy here. I'm here because whatever your reason may be, but you wouldn't call yourself a Christian. Maybe one of the things that has caused you to struggle with that is this idea of who is a Christian supposed to be? How are they supposed to act? What is real? Because we see a lot of this and that and changing and going through the motions, but what is authentic? So if you have your Bibles, open them to 1 Corinthians chapter 9, starting in verse 19, says this, though I'm free and a slave to no one, I've made myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible. Now, this is his mission statement. This is Paul. If he was going to have an advertisement, this is what it would be. Paul, someone who's willing to do anything for anyone in order that they would hear the good news of Jesus Christ. Brought to you by Netflix. But this would be his advertisement. This would be what he is going to do. I'm a free. He goes, look, no one owns me, and it's not just in the classical slave definition. He's saying no one owns me. No one tells me what I can or can't do except for God. I'm a slave to no one, and yet I am going to do things which means I am going to have to surrender myself to others. Not do things the way that I'd want to do them, not do things the way that I'm comfortable doing them. I am going to be willing to step out of myself in order to do this one thing. That is the most important. This is what Paul is all about. To do this one thing. That people would listen. That I would have a voice into people's lives. That they would hear the gospel of Jesus. That they would hear the good news about who Jesus is and what he wants to do. Verse 20. To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under that law, so that I could win those under the law. There are so many cultural things that Paul had to deal with, whether it was the way he dressed, or the way he talked, or how he presented scripture, or how he presented himself in culture. There were so many things that he could stand back and go, I don't do that. That's not what I believe. And yet he is saying, look, if I am willing to consider the culture as a means of getting close to people, so that, not just so I can get close to them so I can be accepted into their group and we can hang out together, but if I can relate to them and get into their culture, then I might have a voice into their life. Then they might be willing to listen to me rather than letting those things get in the way. It's like when I've been on all kinds of mission trips all over the world. And there is one solution. If you don't speak the language, we go down to Mexico, and if you don't speak Spanish, there is apparently a really easy way to get them to speak English or to understand English. Talk really loud and really slowly, and make sure you move your lips a lot. Suddenly they understand English. Yes? No, of course not. And yet we do that all the time. Hi, my name is Jeff. Very nice to meet you. Would you like to hear the good news of Jesus Christ?
Yes.
Not one time have I ever had somebody go, oh, sí, muchas gracias. Oh, sí. Not one time. They end up looking at their friend. And they go, no. If I really, really, really want people to understand something really important and they don't speak my language, what should I do? Speak their language. Whether it's going and getting a translator or devoting myself to learning the language like Hudson Taylor did, we have to invest. We have to be willing to speak the language of the people. But over and over and over, as Christians, we think, hey, if they just know I go to church, that'll communicate it for them. They'll completely understand who Jesus is and what he wants to do. All I have to do is just, I've got my water bottle with an Exit 83 sticker on it. Or I put a cross on the front of my folder at school. There, that's speaking the language. And that's all I have to do, and people will understand that I'm a Christian, and they'll understand all that that means and what I stand for and who God is. Paul is going, look, to the Jews I became like a Jew, and I did some of the cultural stuff that I needed to do so that it didn't get in the way, so I wasn't standing there going, my name is Paul. I love Jesus. Can you say Jesus? Right? And nobody's going to listen to him. So he was willing to be who he needed to be. And we're going to look at some of the limits that Paul acknowledges when he's talking and saying this. He was willing to take on some of the things that he didn't have to. He didn't necessarily even want to. But he's going, look, so that I could win anybody that I could earn a voice into their life so that they could understand who Jesus is and what he wants to do. There was something called a Nazirite vow. It was a 7-day cleansing where you had to go through this process of being cleansed emotionally and spiritually and physically for 7 days. And Paul knew that if he was going to attempt to reach these people, he would have to take this Nazirite vow. He would have to go through this cleansing. He knew God didn't require that of him. And yet he was willing to do that because he said, I'm not willing to let anything get in the way of somebody hearing about Jesus. This is the number one thing. This is the most important thing. Verse 21. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. Now, read this. Look at this. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law. Somebody please tell me, what is he not saying? Think about it.
There are no rules
What?
there aren't any laws
He's not saying that, hey, so that I could reach the people who have no law, who aren't living for any God, I became like them. I went out and I partied and I drank and I was wild and I just did whatever because that's what I needed to do in order to reach these people. He clarifies it. He says, though I'm not free from God's law, there are still things in your life that as you are trying to live out your faith and you're trying to identify with people and get people to give you a voice into their life, he is not saying, so man, if you're at a party and everybody's drinking, man, get drinking because then they'll listen to you talk about Jesus. He's not talking about that. He's saying there are still ways that I'm supposed to live under God's law. But he entered the culture with the focus of going, you know what? I realize that that bringing these people to youth group isn't the only way that I can expose them to Jesus. We get locked into what Matthew called it sort of this Jesus mode, where we go, oh, well, the way that I'm a Christian is I have a cross on my folder. Or if I'm going to tell people about Jesus, I just have to get them to youth group. By all means, bring them to youth group. That's fine. But what Paul's talking about is for those who don't have the law, for those who have no interest in religion or God, don't let that stop you and go, well, they're never going to come to church. He's going, I got involved in their life. I showed care and compassion for their life. I show interest in what they're interested in with some boundaries. One of the ways that I've done this in my life is when I was in college, a group of us in the college group had played baseball our entire lives. And we thought, you know what? We got it. And we should play baseball. Well, there's all kinds of church softball leagues where this church plays against this church, and then this church plays against this church. And so you're still just surrounded. You're in this church bubble, and everybody prays before the game and after, and it's fine. That, I believe, meets a need in people's lives. But we really felt like, you know what? I'm tired of being in the church bubble. So we joined the league over at Quake Stadium. It's just the Rancho Cucamonga Old Man Softball League. And we went over there, and we decided, we had this focus to win those who didn't have the law, who didn't, or who weren't going to go to church. And we went over there and we said, you know what? We are going to be competitive, but we are going to be kind. We're going to be generous. We're going to demonstrate our faith in a variety of ways, but in a way that would earn a voice into these other teams' lives. And that's what we did. We went over there and we played hard. And we lost a lot. And then we started to win a lot. But anyway, it was competitive. But before every game, we would pray. Out in the open. It wasn't a secret. We made sure that our sportsmanship was higher than anyone else in that league. We would congratulate people. We would help people up. We'd pray for people when they got injured. And it was something where everybody knew that this team wasn't just a bunch of drinking buddies who got together and were playing softball. This was different. And we ended up getting in some good conversations with people. We ended up playing in that league like 6 seasons. And it was a great opportunity for us to reach out in a culture, realizing that, hey, don't get discouraged if you can't get somebody to church. Paul recognized that he wasn't going to get everybody to go to church. His goal wasn't to get them to go to church. His goal was to get them to see Jesus. This is the reason that we do water wars and neon bunko and all these other events that we have, swim parties, so that we can reach out to people who are like, I'm not going to church, but bring them to a place where, hey, we want to identify with you. We just want to have fun with you, so that there can be a trust, so that we can earn a voice into their life. And this is what Paul is encouraging them to do. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people so that by all possible means I might save some. I do this apparently. I do this all for the sake of the gospel, that I might share its blessings. Winning others to Christ requires us to present the gospel, present the good news of Christ to lost people without unnecessarily offending them. If you're here this morning and you would call yourself a Christian, what has this looked like in your life? One, have you just been like, I'm going to win people for Christ, and you're just offending? Or have you backed off and you don't talk about your faith because you're afraid of being offending? You think that that's the only way to do it, that the only options are be super in your face, which offends people, or don't say anything at all. Paul gives this example of being all things to all people, but how do we do that in light of what he said in Romans 12, which is this: don't conform to the patterns of the world. So you're supposed to reach people, but you're not supposed to become like them. How do we do that? What Jesus said in John 17, they do not belong to this world any more than I do. Make them holy by your truth. Teach them your word, which is truth. Just as you sent me into the world, I am sending them into the world. So it's this call of being in the world, but not being of the world, not being identified by the same things that the world is identified with. But we come back to this extreme. Well, if I live like a Christian, people are going to hate me, I'm going to be offensive, or I don't say anything. Here's an example. Amish people, devoted in faith. So devoted that they live in Amish communities all together, where they reject anything of the outside. Modern technology, electricity, cars, they give it all up. They farm, they all wear uniforms, and they reject anything from the outside world. Well, how successful do you think they are at reaching people with the news of Christ? Not at all. I mean, all that's happening is that people are looking at them and going, they're strange. Absolutely devoted people. I'm not criticizing their devotion to God. But they are missing, they have taken this tact of going, no. We can't even be in the world. We have to be in our own world. You guys, the reality is that we are in the world. God put us here. He put us in this culture. But we're not supposed to take on the identity of the world. Jesus said this, "You are the salt of the world, but if the salt has lost its flavor, it's thrown out as worthless." See, the alternative is this. You're a Christian, but you blend in so much that that this person doesn't have any greater chance at influencing people for Jesus than these people do. Because nobody sees the difference. And maybe you're here this morning and you're not a Christian, and this is your problem. You look around and you see Christians either have to be this or they're this. And you're like, what's the point? They're just like everybody else. In fact, they treat me worse than the people who don't believe in God treat me. We are part of this world, but we will keep people from knowing the love of Jesus if we just fully embrace everything that they do, approve of everything that culture says we're supposed to approve of. Paul's mission, his purpose in life, was to let people know Jesus. And he said, I'm not going to let the way I dress, I'm not going to let the way I act, I'm not going to let cultural things that don't have anything to do with following God or obeying God, but I'm not going to let cultural things hold me back or get in the way of people hearing about Jesus. To do whatever he had to do. And he viewed it like this. A race. He said, look, in a race, all the runners run, but only one gets the prize. Run in such a way to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. He's looking at his life, considering his life, and he's going, look, I'm not calling myself a Christian and going to church because I think that that's the most important thing. Some do. You come to youth group, you come to church, and I'm glad you're here, and I want you to keep coming. But you're settling for so much less, and you're just sort of running aimlessly. You're like a boxer who just sort of punches around and never engages. What Paul is saying is that the gospel of Jesus, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. He's the only way to get to heaven. That message is the most important thing. And there should be nothing that gets in the way of that. And there are cautions that Paul talks about. He's going, look, I'm not free from what Christ has called me, the way Christ has called me to live. I don't get to just go do whatever I want so everybody will identify with me. That is that blended picture where you just sort of blend in. But he's saying, hey, have you given up on your friends because you can't get them to church? Have you stopped seeking God or being open to the idea of Jesus in your life because the example you've been given is people who you can't even have a normal conversation with them. And they just want to be condemning, and would you be open to the good news of Jesus who loves you and created you? And what do those who have put their faith in Jesus need to do to reach those people? Because this is the most important thing. Hudson Taylor moved to China. That's already a big deal. Hudson Taylor was willing to go up to complete strangers and say, hey, I need you to know about Jesus. That's already a big deal. But when that didn't work, he was willing to become a slave to others and dress in an unfamiliar way, learn an unfamiliar language, so that nothing would get in the way of the most important message. And I want to encourage you guys in that. It's so easy to walk out these doors and just blend in. For some of you, it may be easy to walk out these doors and beat people over the head with a Bible. It's so easy to walk out these doors and get discouraged because you can't get your friends to come to church. Church is not the goal. Beating somebody over the head and offending them is not the goal. Helping people see that they are loved by Jesus and that he wants a personal relationship is our goal. And he's called all of us to it. So Lord, right now, you are working on each heart in here in a different way. We each have different opportunities. We each have different things that come easy to us. We each have different groups of friends that are into different stuff. And God, we don't want to give up. We don't want to drop out of the race. We want to know how to be used by you. So I pray for each person here that you would open our hearts to the truth. You would open each of our hearts to the importance of the truth of Jesus. God, that we need you, that the world needs you. And God, bring us to a place where we have a voice into people's lives and that they would be able to hear your truth.